I'd like to welcome Dr. Venkat Srinivasan. And please. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. You've heard a lot about AI already, and every speaker has talked about it. But my comments are going to focus sort of a different take on AI. Alan has spoken a lot about applications. Secretary Nunnally spoke a lot about what the future is like, could be. The governor certainly tried to paint a picture of how you should choose AI projects and so on. I thought I would, in talking to Tom earlier, I thought I would focus on going a little bit into the behind the scenes and demystify AI. You know, with all these conversations, you would tend to think that machines are somehow, this is all magic, that machines are just going to learn everything by themselves, and we're all going to be out of jobs, etc. There's a lot of automation that's already happened. I've been fortunate to have been at the forefront of a lot of it, and I believe a lot more is coming. But really, I think my comments are going to be going a little bit deeper and conceptually trying to paint a picture of what AI is. And it's not magic, right? So how do machines learn? Well, that itself is a very interesting phrase. Do machines really learn? So we want to focus on those things a little bit. I'm hoping that my comments will help you frame the AI problem, and that when you go back to your desks and functions and jobs, that you're able to, when you do come across opportunities, you're able to recognize where you could and where you would not be able to use AI. That's sort of the hope, right? AI is not new. I've been working in the AI field now for I've been working in the AI field now for I think roughly about 32 years. My PhD was in 1985, which was on AI, and we did AI very differently those days. But nevertheless, some of the basic algorithms that we use today that have, of course, lots of changes and evolution in the last few years, last 7 to 10 years. But nevertheless, all those foundational algorithms were invented and discovered in the late 50s, early 60s, 70s, a lot of work, 80s, even more work. But we never could really use them in the real world, right? But it's not new. So what's all this excitement about AI? Where is it coming from? So in the last 7, 8, 10 years, AI has been incredibly resurgent. And I think that you can attribute that to two things. And the governor talked about it, I think the secretary talked about it. And those are two in my mind. One, connectedness. Many of the applications that people are calling AI applications are really not AI applications. They're just connecting dots. And even as you connect dots, a lot of interesting intelligence just surfaces. And the machines may have never learned anything, but just connecting dots gives you that functionality. So connectedness, whether we want to, how we define AI, some people define it very narrowly, some people define it very broadly. But connectedness has become pervasive, right? And you've seen some examples of this. Camera example, I think, is a very good one. The other thing that's happening is physical and digital are blurring, right? They're all sort of merging together. So there are sensors everywhere today. So buildings, things that we thought were solid and physical and never imagined that they would become malleable, are becoming information-centric. They can be controlled with information that sensors send us. So connectedness, I think, is a key part, a key phenomenon that has sort of led to the excitement. The second one is data. And we've spoken a lot about it today, but I'll just say that it's ubiquitous. The other interesting thing about data is it's not just traditional data, it's alternate data. It's data that has either not been available before, I think notwithstanding all the controversy, et cetera, the Facebook data, right? That's alternate data, the kind of data we never had before. All of a sudden, that kind of data is powering a lot of excitement because it feeds into connectedness feeds into data, and all of a sudden, those algorithms that we could never deploy are all of a sudden have become very useful. And so this has led to this whole movement, which statisticians call learn from data branch of statistics. And that's all the stuff you've heard, machine learning, deep learning, neural networks. They all are examples of a new branch of statistics that we refer to as learn from data. So two things powering the excitement, more recent excitement about in AI. One is connectedness, the other is ubiquitousness of data. So I want to go one step further and demystify. How does the machine actually learn? Now, it doesn't have the ability like us, and even us. How does the brain learn? And to some degree, Alan is right that there is a similarity between how the brain learns and how some of the algorithms learn, but the similarity stops at a pretty early stage. The machines aren't they don't have the ability to think and abstract and extrapolate, and we're still far, many, many years from being able to equip the machines to do that. But I think at the top of this, the top of this sort of step is that data comes in all kinds of shapes and forms, right? There is image data, that's as you go through the toll booth, a camera captures your plate number, and back in some control room somewhere, somebody's extracting the license plate from that, not somebody, and some machine is extracting the license plate, matching it, and going to your bank account and debiting you with the appropriate toll fee. But that image comes, the camera sends the image back. And you have text, you have data, you have numbers, you also have voice. We saw examples of chatbots. Now, chatbots, when you see chatbot, you think, oh, there's a machine there somewhere that is actually acting like a human and speaking. That's not the case. Right? Chatbot there's a voice component, then there's a text component. So when you ask the question, that's a text component that the engines read the text, try and understand what you're asking for, compose a response in text, and create an audio file and play the audio file. That's sort of how this happens, right? So just to demystify how this thing happens. How does the learning happen? I think there's three ways you can learn. Machine intelligence is acquired. One is expert knowledge. This has been around for forever, right? This is how we used to do them in the 50s and 60s. And any intelligence that you embed in a machine is machine intelligence. It's just that with all the data and connectedness, the pace of discovery and the ability to discover in an unprogrammed fashion is really what is exciting. Right? That's sort of the fuel behind all the AI excitement. That's done by two branches of study, of science. One called computational statistics. That's the learn from data type of statistics. And everybody has gone through some statistics in their bachelor's or graduate programs, right? The kind of statistics that you have most likely studied is the quote unquote the old type of statistics. It's what we call parametric statistics. You did regression and you did those sorts of things. You did ANOVA tables and all that. The new form of statistics is there's so much data now people don't care about the bell-shaped curve. So who cares about the bell-shaped curve? We got all the data we want. Let's just see what the data tells us. So that field, that branch is called computational statistics. And so all this data comes in, and we feed the data to these algorithms that effectively look for ways of combining the input data and so that they could get the output data. So if you have, and I'll give you some examples in a minute. That's this process of learning. Is you have a set of outcomes, you have all this data of whatever type, and the engines are looking for patterns. I think several speakers spoke about patterns. And those patterns are, what are the patterns? Patterns are some predictable combination of those factors that can give me the outcome. So if I have 100 cases of fraud, and I've got a universe of data, and I'm going to feed it to the machine and let the machine go figure out what combination of those factors could predict those 100 fraud cases, the outcomes, right? And we'll speak a little bit more about it in a minute. But when it comes to language, natural language, the challenges are substantially more complex. Today, all these neural nets and all those other methods deal with numbers, image, very well. In images, actually, particularly, it might surprise you, but that's the easiest. Nothing is easy, but that's the easiest. Because the underlying data is very homogeneous. It's black and white. So that's, you figure out combinations of black and white. If you want to recognize the face of a cat, given 1 million cats, you can say, well, I can figure out patterns of black and white that will give me the outcome, which is correct recognition of cats, and the false positives where you don't have a cat and you're able to differentiate the two. So, but when it comes to text, the problem is exponentially more complex. Technology is not there yet. And in my previous company, we've actually pioneered a lot of work here. But the technology today isn't as far advanced in computational linguistics as it is in statistics. So when you see conversational AI, you see chatbots. Chatbots aren't as sophisticated as they might appear to be when you read about them. They're actually pretty canned. You put a question in, you get a response. Most of the time it is canned. That works for 70–80% of the problem, but it is not so smart that it can formulate the sentences on its own. It truly doesn't understand the conversation yet. That's where we're headed. As the right side, the computational linguistics space evolves, that's where we will head. So when you look at all this, you get a whole bunch of data. The machines learn from the data, but one important thing to remember is that there is no real world application that will not require human assistance. Almost every real world application that you're going to put out there is going to require human assistance for it to be useful. So Google search is okay. Google search is what I would call a low value problem. We're thrilled we have Google search, but it's a low value problem. If you get it wrong, nobody gets hurt. It's okay. So false positives are fine. But when it comes to healthcare outcomes, you can't have a false positive. Well, if you can't deal with a false positive, you can't do without human assistance. So even though the machines will learn a lot of intelligence from the data, the flip side of this is also true. Remember that the reason we're all excited about learning from data is because some of these problems are so complex. They manifest in such complex ways in data that it's hard for the expert to sit down and write all the knowledge and rules in sort of a reasonable period of time. So extracting knowledge from experts takes a very, very long time. It's an impossible task. So everybody got very excited when they got all this data and said, well, we don't need the experts anymore. Well, that's also wrong, because it turns out, when you think about it, that even with all this data, you really don't have the data representing all the possible combinations of causal phenomena in it. So you can learn from data. The experts don't know what they don't know sometimes, or we certainly don't know what we don't know. But the flip side of it is that the data almost always will not contain all the representational elements you need for it to be 100% accurate. So there is yes, on the one hand, I have lots of data. On the other hand, that's also a key assumption why just relying on data alone will never work. So human assistance is always going to be important, because we have this incredible ability to abstract and extrapolate that machines haven't yet been taught how to do. And so I would say that you don't have to be in a rush to think humans aren't going to be needed. That's a very long ways away from being true. So you process all this data, you build these algorithms. These algorithms, at the end of the day, are statistical programs. There's no magic. This is computational statistics. Give me a set of outcomes, and give me a set of input variables, and just give me lots of data, even if you don't know what input variables there are, and I'll go find a pattern that will predict the outcome, is the basic idea. Just to frame this a little bit for you, as you look at your day-to-day processes, functions, etc., how do you recognize where you could use AI and where you may not be able to use? I sort of think of this in 5 buckets. One, I would say extract. Extract is the most The governor talked about low-hanging fruit, talked about simple problem, talked about problems that, don't worry about all this really fancy predictive analytics. There are so many opportunities that are sort of, really simple operational types of problems. That's what I think most of the extract problems are. Extract problems exist because you've got some data in a format that you can't read. Read as in the machines can't read. There's a PDF document. There is unstructured text, and there's information in it. And your process is stuck because somebody has to type it in. That's an extract problem. The second problem is classification. Google search is a classification problem. You got some data, and you need to read through it and figure out where it belongs. Or what topic is it? What is it talking about? That's a classification problem. The third problem is a predict or an optimized problem. I've got this, the GPS. Google GPS is an optimization problem. It's what we would call a vehicle routing problem, right? We also sometimes refer to it as a traveling salesman problem. So you want to go from point A to point B, how do I get there? Given knowledge of roads and routes and traffic and so forth. There's also predictive analytics given, again, example. I'll give you an example in a minute, but outcomes, input data, how do I find a pattern? Interpret is a very complex problem. And if I have a news article, can the engine read it? And can I interpret the article, just like you and I would? And finally, discover is where I just don't understand the phenomenon at all, and I've got a whole bunch of data. I want to figure out what might be in the data. And so continuing the framing, I would say that I would bucket, when you think about AI projects, I would bucket them into two types. One that require prediction, and the other that don't. And I just sort of call them operational and predictive. There are lots and lots of everybody is talking about predictive. That's where the fancy stuff, and it's sort of very impressive. But there's also lots of projects that are operational, which will just really make your life easier, streamline the process, help you automate things, and just reduce the monotonous nature of some of the tasks your people might be doing. So I wouldn't disregard them. And transformation, truly disruptive impact can happen either because you just have such a big operational problem, or you have a huge predictive problem you've solved. This is sample process. I'm not going to go through the process, but all operational processes sort of look like this. You get some data, you extract, normalize, you apply, you interpret it in some fashion, you apply some rules, decide, and you then monitor. And in this, the idea in here that I tried to do was to show you where machine learning could apply. And often, licensure is a good example of this process, right? You get some information, you process it, and you apply some rules, and you decide whether to grant the license or not. Now, often, if you don't have a very structured, normalized, standardized data input process, oftentimes that's going to get stuck in extract. In the real world, in the non-governmental world, there's tons and tons of problems that have this problem. You get non-standard data, and you don't know what to do with it. Lots of people are typing, and once you eliminate that with AI, then you can reimagine the process and automate it. Certainly in decide, you can decide, if you have simple rules, you can easily code them. But if there are lots, it's a very complex problem, then you don't know, experts may not always be right, so you then want to do some machine learning. Here's an example of an extract problem. And this is a financial statement. You've got financial statements, and you've got some footnotes. Now, there's not a bank in the world that I know that doesn't do this manually, right? You have analysts who type this data, and this is at the heart of all commercial banking, commercial lending. You get millions of these, and there are lots of people who receive it, they type it in, and they make their decisions in their head about what should go where. And then, so you see on the right-hand side is what they might have typed it into. But this is a classic, this is an operational AI. And we have in my previous company, we created a machine learning solution to this, which would not only extract the data from all of those statements, which are all non-standard, could be in different languages, but also go read the footnotes, interpret the text, attach it to the main statement wherever it needs to be attached, and normalize the data. So this now is used by many banks. That's a good example of an extract problem. Now, this problem I know that in the private industry world, this is a very large problem. Here's another interesting problem. This is both an extract, a classify, and a natural language processing problem, all rolled into one. And what you have on the left is a legal contract. And on the right-hand side is an invoice. But if I just focus on the left-hand side, we've got, I suspect, you also have the same issue. You have millions of contracts that have been written over many, many, many years. And often, sometimes you don't know what's in which contract. And so there is the need to go in and figure out for various purposes. Impossible for humans to read all of them, but machines can do that. So on the left-hand side is an example of machine learning where the machine goes in and it can read. This is using computational linguistics. It reads, it structures the contracts, it detects the clauses, and it can do various things like presence, absence of certain provisions. It can certainly detect, extract key items. It can even interpret the strength of different clauses if you give it what's good and what's bad, right? On the right-hand side, you have an invoice. And this is a real problem. This example is from a very large grocery chain. And they spend $60 billion in procuring commodities and so on long-term contracts. And they have a need to audit the invoices against the contract. So, you can't do this manually, right? So in this case, the machines read the contract, the machines also extract the invoice, and the machines figure out the logic, the pricing logic from the contract and match the two. And in this case, we found a 4 to 5% leakage. On $60 billion, 4 to 5% leakage is a pretty large sum of money. So that's an interesting problem. But this is a hybrid problem. You're using extract, you're using classify, you're using NLP. Here's a predictive AI problem. And I heard about fraud earlier. I think you have a large number of these. I heard the Inspector General talk about various audits, etc. That in this case, you have a machine learning solution which takes in a data set of bankrupt companies that went bad. And you throw that into the machine along with a whole bunch of companies that are healthy, quote unquote, you consider them healthy. So with this data set, which is a fairly large data set, the machines find a pattern to say, look, we here are characteristics of bad companies, characteristics of good companies. How can we come up with a pattern that would help us differentiate the two? It's actually a classification problem. Given this model, and you get a new company, you will decide using this algorithm whether that's going to likely be a bankrupt company or not. That's the idea. And you can see here, this data set, 2 years prior to bankruptcy, we are able to predict the blue line on the left side is called the trained data set. So that's the data set on which the models were estimated, meaning we use that data set to create the models. On the right-hand side is what you do generally to make sure that the models can work in the real world, you split often the sample into two, a train and test. You build it on train and test it on test. And you can see here that the accuracies are up in the 90th percentile for predicting bankruptcies. The real accuracy you want to really look at is on the test data set. And the various colored lines are just different methods, different algorithms. And this study was done to really just figure out if any particular method is better at predicting bankruptcies or not. We conclude that there's really not a huge amount of difference. And there's a reason why we did this. One of the things in computational statistics is that some methods will give you black boxes, and some methods will give you traceability. Now, particularly the earlier speakers that I heard, I would say traceability, auditability is going to be huge from a government point of view. So for you, neural nets is not a good solution. Neural nets won't give you auditability. You don't know what's in the black box. But random forest will. The regression trees will. This study tells me that accuracies, actually in this case, random forest and CART both do better than neural nets. But there are cases where neural nets will do equally well. But I think in your case, traceability is actually key. But I'll speak a little bit more about this later. Finally, an interpret example. Here's a news article. And our goal is, through AI, through machine learning, our goal is to get the engines to read it and reach the same high-level conclusions that you and I will. So in this case, this is about Walmart, and this is a product we created in my previous company called Real-Time Intelligence. So we would read millions of news articles and figure out which news article is going to impact which company how, and we would provide that to fund managers. So they could, the argument was, the hypothesis was that information asymmetry, if I can just get you the information faster than anybody else, that you could potentially trade on it, and that constitutes some alpha, as that industry calls it. So in this case, this is the interpretation. This is a hard, this not everybody can do. Even I'd say that even Watson can't quite get there. But I think this is where the technology is headed. Finally, the blurring of physical and digital space. This is, I think, to me, this is a very exciting development. I had always compartmentalized the physical space out, and all of a sudden, in the last 5, 6, 7 years, the physical space is morphing. All these business models, if you're a facilities management business, you're really becoming an information business. You're no longer a physical facilities management business. That's a very interesting development. I'm on the board of some companies that do this. But on the right-hand side, you see some autonomous devices. So I've only pictured robots here. But that robot, the first one, is actually very interesting. And that's a telepresence robot. And on it, you could put all kinds of sensors and do various things. But a telepresence robot, it's autonomous. The key thing in autonomous versus non-autonomous is an autonomous robot. You could leave one here, and it will, in a period of maybe half an hour, it will learn the topography. That's the whole point of autonomous. So you don't have to teach it. Then all you have to do is label and say, oh, that thing you see, that's called stairs. That is a door. And that's it. Then you can just teleport. So teleport robot is like teleconference, except you can move the robot. You can teleport yourself into the robot and go to wherever you need to go. So that has tremendous applications, right? It has, even Alan also talked about this, but it has, you can do facility inspection, you can take it to places which are risky, et cetera. On the left-hand side, right, smart buildings, you sort of get the idea, lots of sensors. They all come in, same idea though, right? Data comes in, you analyze it, and it goes through all those algorithms. Finally, I'm just going to leave it, have you think about, you sort of saw some examples, and you earlier saw what actually goes into a machine learning, quote unquote, right? There's some statistical algorithms that act on the information. All of it is based on some patterns and outcomes. It is not as complex as it sounds. But really, to me, the way you design a successful AI solution is not just throw data and the algorithms together. That's not how, there's a lot of hype on AI too, right? There's a tremendous amount of hype. And very few companies can deliver. Very few. And I think that's because, to me, at the end of all this technology is only a means to an end. So we can't lose sight of that. We can't lose sight, this is not magic. So unless you really understand the problem well, no amount of algorithmic manipulation is going to get you a good solution. So that's one. And you think about AI, using AI. So you really have to understand what it is you're after and make sure you pick the right method for the problem. The second, understand limits of machine intelligence. It often will require that you be a little patient in some problems. Don't expect it to just happen overnight. Sometimes it takes some time. And I think we already spoke about it. Several people talked about correlation, but we use correlation very loosely. Correlation is not causality. That's a very important thing to internalize. Just throwing data at the problem and you get a model, don't think that you've got solved the problem, you've found something, you've learned something from the data. It has to make sense to you. And so causality is not the same thing as correlation. You can find any two data sets that are completely unrelated and find that they have some correlation. But it doesn't mean one causes the other. So it's very important to remember that. Traceability, I think in your context especially, becomes crucial. So auditability, tracing, making sure the engine can explain how it got to the decision it did, will automatically rule out a number of methods. Right? Neural nets is a good example. Deep learning works great, but the resulting intermediate neuron layers, what they call neuron layers, you can't understand them. So it won't work in many cases. And I think this is the 4-box notion that when you do adopt a portfolio of projects, you want to balance, right? I mean, I think I wrote a paper on this. Happy to send it to you. It's called "What's Your AI Strategy?" And it's actually quite similar in thinking to what the governor laid out. But the idea is you want a portfolio. You want a portfolio of operational AI and predictive AI. My words for what was low in difficulty and high in impact sort of thing. And I think the other important thing to remember is just machine learning alone isn't going to get you the impact that you're thinking you will get, because there are lots of other parts of this business process that you need to think about. AI is often one part of an automation solution. So you need to make sure all the other things are thought about. Can you get data from one system connected to other systems? Often people get stuck with these. So you need to plan the whole thing out. Is it predictive? Is it just analytical work? Or is it automation? Challenges, I think a number of people spoke about this, but I won't spend a whole lot of time. But I do think that before every technology wave, there's been a panic wave. For every technology wave in history, we've thought about, oh my God, the society is going to change, we'll lose jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So far, every technology wave has also created a whole lot of new jobs. And the rate of new job creation has often outpaced the loss of jobs or the loss of old jobs. I don't know how this time, what sorts of timing differences we will encounter this time. The feeling you get is that the pace is so fast that there's going to be some dislocation. And it's up to us all to figure out, constantly stay on top of it, figure out what sorts of new skills do we need to train people on, and the higher value thing that the secretary talked about. And so that sort of, I think, is how we overcome the first challenge. And the second, I do believe that the machine learning insight is valid, but you've got to, can't just trust it to the machine. So this is where traceability comes, is very important. Certainly, a lot of people talked about privacy and transparency, so I won't go into that too much. But let me stop there, and do we have time for questions? Or yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. Does anybody have a question? Yeah.
That slide about bankruptcy, so I assume you must have data points that would lead you to believe that this company, a company would be bankrupt. Is there a way to read the data so that you could prevent, or at least advise the company how to prevent the bankruptcy? Because there's got to be data points for the successful.
That's exactly right. That's the idea here is first you start with, in building this model, the purpose of building this model is to do exactly what you just said, which is to help all companies and let them know how close they are to possible bankruptcy. That's the purpose. But in doing that, we collect historical data on bankruptcies and healthy companies, so just so the machine can figure out the difference, and then build the model based on that historical data, and then you can advise companies going forward. That's exactly the point.
Thanks. We have any other questions? Well, let me say thank you, Doctor, so much.
Thanks for your time.